Welcome to Grid Pulse. I'm Bryce Yonker with Grid Forward. Today we have with us Ryan Mitchell. Ryan is coming from St. John Energy, and he's the CEO there. Ryan, thanks for being on.
Hi, Bryce. Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate your interest in our story and our journey over at St. John Energy. I'm an engineer with an MBA, and I did spend the first part of my career within telecommunications and more specifically within the Bell group of companies, primarily leading business transformation planning and the introduction of new technologies. About 10 years ago, I transitioned into the energy sector, and I'm now in my fifth year as president and CEO of St. John Energy. And I would say that transition into energy, it really began through conversations that I had with Ray Robinson, the former CEO of St. John Energy. Ray got me really excited about the future of electricity and believed that experience from the telecommunications sector would help turn some of the industry's challenges into opportunities. He saw the potential for a small, nimble utility like St. John Energy to embrace disruption, new ideas, and he really wanted to see how far and how quickly we could move into the future. And I have to tell you, Bryce, my time at St. John Energy has been a lot of fun, and I remain extremely bullish about the future of electricity and the role St. John Energy can play in helping to shape it.
Well, it sounds like you guys have a lot of exciting stuff. We will dive into that, but maybe before we do, tell us a little bit about St. John Energy. Who are you guys? What community do you serve? You mentioned you're smallish, so tell us about the organization.
Yeah, sure thing, Bryce. Well, we are a 100-year-old utility that I think I can say has decided not to act our age. We are a community-owned, purely electric utility serving St. John, New Brunswick, so up in Canada. And St. John is Canada's oldest incorporated city. We happen to be home to the country's largest oil refinery and one of the country's major ports. We're about an 8-hour drive northeast of Boston and about an hour from the Maine border. Although we are a distribution utility, we are a bit unique in that we do more than operate poles, wires, and substations. We also retail electricity and we set our own rates. And we do work directly with customers behind the meter through things like heat pump and water heater rentals, EV chargers, and other electrification services. To put our size into perspective, we do distribute about 1 terawatt hour of electricity each year. We are very much a winter peaking utility. And I would say that we're probably best known for the reliability of our system, our focus on affordability, and for being innovative.
So let's talk a bit about what some of the main drivers are for you all. You mentioned you're a fair ways north, so I'm sure you got to harden on the winter system. What are some of the challenges and the drivers that are priorities for you all there in the system that you run?
Right. So in answering that, Bryce, I'll share a little bit about our cost structure because I think that will help inform why we're focusing on some of the things that we are focusing on. So we are a wholesale customer of the provincial utility, and our monthly energy bill is comprised of two components, an energy component and a demand component. The energy amount is approximately $95 Canadian a megawatt hour, and the demand component is quite punitive at $20,000 per megawatt for whatever high water mark that we set and hold for at least 15 minutes each month. So the demand or peak energy, it's very expensive for us. It makes up about 30% of our annual budget. And there's not only a financial incentive, but there's also an environmental incentive with that because peak energy often equates 2 times the greenhouse gas emissions as off-peak electricity generation. So we're very active in terms of looking at how we can drive efficiencies and cost savings through the addition of renewable energy and by reducing peak demand through innovative approaches. You had mentioned with respect to the cold winter. So we are a winter peaking utility because most of the homes in our region are heated by electricity. So on peak days, it generally correlates very tightly with the colder temperatures. And the majority of domestic hot water is also heated by electricity. So often peaks are in the morning as people are getting up, grabbing a shower before heading to work or to school. So we spend a lot of time looking at how we can decrease the supply cost of energy and as well how we can reduce those peak charges.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit on what's driving the cost structure there. Affordability is our central focus, our central theme for our main convening this year. There are so many drivers impacting delivered prices of electricity right now. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, how you mentioned the winter peak, addressing the winter peak, but maybe you can talk about how you all are, able to keep such competitive rates and, how you prioritize the affordability topic up there.
Right. So our residential rates do remain among the lowest in our region. They're about 25% less than the rest of Atlantic Canada on average, and about 14% less than the national average. In dollars and cents, our residential rate is just under 14 cents Canadian. So that's almost free in US dollars, but about 10 cents in US dollars per kilowatt hour. There's really two main areas that we focus on that have allowed us to maintain those low rates. I mentioned our focus on renewable energy. So we have over the last couple of years added about 15% of our supply through distribution connected wind energy. So it has reduced emissions, but it also has avoided millions of dollars in energy costs. We're also very focused on demand response. We have improved our load factor by approximately 7% since 2020. And there's really a few main things that have contributed to that. One of the most significant is voltage conservation and reduction. The majority of our power transformers are equipped with tap changers. So we do fluctuate the voltage up and down depending on the overall load on our system. And that has proven to be very effective, especially where we have relatively short feeder lengths. We also have been doing some work over the last few years with utility scale storage. We were actually the first in the world to deploy Tesla Megapack batteries going back to 2019, and we have just over 7 megawatts on our system today. And then the third main area is with respect to controllable water heaters. So I mentioned we do rent water heaters. We actually have about 25,000 water heaters that we own and rent to our customers today. And we have been implementing controllers on those water heaters, again, to be able to influence, let's say, the demand or the draw that they would be having on our system. So because of the success that we've had with renewable energy and the innovation around demand response, we have been able to absorb some of the rate increases from the provincial utility on us as a wholesale customer. So we've been able to save our customer from a few percentage point increases over the last couple of years. And then last year, we actually would have waived the monthly system connect fee for our customers, which equated to issuing a $25 dividend to each of our customers. So that was very, well received. But quite simply, I would say we're trying really hard to prove that the cleanest and the most modern grid can also be the most affordable grid.
We're going to dive into a couple of those areas. But congratulations on being able to achieve such competitive rates. I mean, those really are, competitive anywhere in North America. And you guys, it's a somewhat extreme environment up there. Do you have much infrastructure underground? How do you maintain such competitive rates when you're kind of looking at the sort of resilience investments that you all need to balance that maintain the reliability for the system that you all need?
Yeah, we actually do have a significant amount of underground infrastructure. We probably have more underground infrastructure here in St. John than most of the rest of Atlantic Canada combined. It serves us very well when the wind is blowing, but to your point, when it requires renewal, it is very expensive, and we are facing a fair amount of renewal ahead of us. So, we see that as being, could be up to 12 times more expensive than, your traditional, overhead. But again, it is a critical element in terms of our overall system design to ensure high reliability.
Yep. Well, you mentioned that you guys have added some renewables into the supply side of the equation there. I think you all have a pretty substantial target for some additional resources that you're trying to bring in. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that campaign and the roadmap that you guys have ahead. for what you're looking to achieve.
Right. So a few years back, we did receive some funding from the federal government to embark on an initiative that we named 030. So 030 was really all about how might we reach a net zero electricity system by the year 2030. So very aggressive, some would say impossible. But again, it was really intended to challenge ourselves, like what would it actually take to get there? What would we have to do? And there was really three primary areas within 030 that we focused on. The first one was cleaning the supply of electricity. The second one was all around electrification. So working with our customers, what programs and supports and services would our customers like to see us bring to the market to help them, get off of fossil fuels and move to electricity more. And then the third was all around planning for grid expansion. So as more and more customers, electrify their lives, like what parts of the grid are going to exhaust and require upgrades. So those were the three primary areas. The roadmap phase, more recently completed, and we're active in execution.
Fantastic. So let's dive into some of the components. You had mentioned that there are significant portion of resources that you guys are doing to kind of leverage flexible resources. So you mentioned renting hot water heaters to your customers. You mentioned kind of the early days of energy storage. I imagine you've mentioned most of the main programs there, but what are you achieving with them? Are you continuing to look to expand them? Are there other complementary, maybe flexible solutions that you guys are looking to add into the mix? Yeah, maybe you can peel that back a little bit further.
Yeah, sure. So, Brace, maybe I'll start with respect to from the customer and the behind the meter side. Up to 70% of our customers would rent at least one product from us. It started with water heaters, many years ago, and then it has more recently expanded into renting heat pumps. And heat pumps are about 4 times more efficient than electric baseboards. So there has been a lot of electric baseboard, believe it or not, in our territory. So that has been a very successful program. Smart thermostats, electric vehicle charging more recently. And I would say that has really allowed us to create a trusting relationship with the customers, and as well has allowed us to remove some of the upfront cost of electrification by offering rental program as opposed to an outright sale. And, as you were indicating, those assets offer a lot of value as it relates to, to supporting the grid. So, just as an example, water heaters represent a very interesting and significant flexible resource. The water heaters that we have deployed, in essence, have a 4 kilowatt element. And where I mentioned we have 25,000 of them. So from a nameplate perspective, that equates to approximately 100 megawatts of controllable load. A water heater isn't an electric battery, though. Obviously, it's a thermal battery, but it already exists. It's an asset that we already own. So it's if we own the asset, how can we make most efficient use of it? How can we look at, shifting some of the times when it's being used without affecting hot water availability? And as a result of that, can we reduce peak demand and lower system costs? We had been working with Aquanta, so some of our tanks are controlled by Aquanta, and now more recently we've been working with OSO, which is a Norwegian company. They happen to supply the majority of our water heaters, but they're looking to integrate a controller directly in the tank, and we find that very interesting because OSO's inner vessel is a stainless steel inner vessel that basically allows the tank to operate, at a much higher water temperature. So in turn, it's a higher capacity thermal battery. I think one of the marketing spins that they put on it is it's the same storage capacity as a typical residential battery, but at a seventh of the cost or something like that, a fraction, of the cost. So we're really looking at how we can become more aggressive and really ramp up the amount of water heater controllers that we have on our system. So certainly that is an area, that we're going to be focusing on over the next couple of years.
And do all of the flexible resources that you all have, do they come into some sort of an interface or a platform that you guys are able to control or see or visualize the sort of resources that you have?
Yeah, great question. So We have been using some of the standalone, I'll say proprietary type interfaces. We have looked at aggregating them. We have had some experience with Virtual Peaker in that respect. We are also doing some work with Kraken, which is the technology arm that was spun out of Octopus Energy, although we're primarily leveraging them for the CIS, so the customer information system, and the meter data management side. But we do have an arrangement with them to look at leveraging their Flex, product as well. So we're looking at how we can most efficiently bring that together right now, actually.
Tired of costly grid upgrades and unpredictable demand? Virtual Peaker's AI-powered virtual power plant software empowers utilities to maximize the value of distributed energy resources. The cutting-edge platform optimizes DER operations, enhances grid stability, and unlocks new revenue streams. Learn more at virtual-peaker.com. Now back to our episode.
So this is actually what got us in touch. So we're going to dive in deep on kind of the data side of this equation. So you all have been using, the information that you're gathering from these programs in some pretty interesting forms and formats. And so I wanted to have you kind of introduce kind of the digital twin effort that you all have in flight and really dive in here on how you guys are using this information and where you see things going. So maybe I'll let you introduce that initiative, and then we'll go deep on the data side of the conversation here.
Yeah, sure thing. So the initiative, Bryce, we refer to it as Plug-in Labs, and it's really the digital twin of our most valuable data sets. And maybe as I explain it, I'll start with the genesis story of Plug-in Labs. Basically, there was a number of, I'll say, recent master's graduates, from local university that had reached out, and they were interested in learning a bit more about challenges and opportunities in the utility sector. So we had a couple of meetings, and they basically decided that they wanted to start a company and develop software to solve, some of these challenges. And they had requested access to a number of different data sets to help them, develop their software. That sounded very simple to me. I thought that was a great idea. We should help them with that. And it turned out that was very challenging for us to do. So that really begged the question, how can we support innovation like that? How can we better support innovation like that? And it eventually turned into how can we at St. John Energy help take the friction out of energy innovation? Utilities hold enormous amounts of valuable data, and it's often fragmented. It's difficult to access and understandably protected because it supports, critical infrastructure. But Plug-in Labs was really intended to remove some of that friction in a secure and structured way. So we're looking at bringing together historical load data, substation information, asset information, GIS, so the graphical, the map layer, the electrical model, and put that in a separate system. And the system that we're using is actually provided by a company called Awesense. So we have this data that exists, I'll say, in a copy of our grid without creating any risk for the live grid. And I like to describe it as a flight simulator for the electricity system. And again, I think it's just really important that we look to collaborate. And that's really what this is all about, is providing access to our data for academia, for the entrepreneurial space to drive innovation that will support the energy transition.
So I'm going to ask all kinds of questions about it because it's such a fascinating initiative. What data sets do you guys have coming into there? You mentioned GIS, you mentioned some of the other information. Do you have advanced meter information? Do you have other sensor data coming in? How granular is it? Yeah, what data comes in to give you the picture of what's happening on the system?
It's a pretty broad spectrum, Bryce. We do have AMI meter data that is populated in the system. We are in the process of updating our AMI infrastructure right now. Actually, we are going with Landis & Gyr in terms of, we refer to it as AMI 2.0. So there is meter data, but we also have load data at the feeder level, at the substation level. We have data related to the asset in terms of what is the size of various transformers that exist within the system, conductor information. And, basically it's quite high resolution in terms of the granularity of the data. Some of it is customizable in terms of, what I'll say the researcher or the third party may have interest in, getting access to. We've really tried to make sure that the system is scalable, so access is repeatable. It's not something that we want to have to get in the middle of every one. Like, we don't want these to be necessarily, let's say, high touch. We really want to have something that's, like low maintenance. At St. John Energy, we can provide controlled access. There is agreements, but then we can kind of step back and, largely, be out of the way. Folks can do their thing with the data. In terms of like future, so you mentioned sensors. So we do actually have, I'll say, a variety of smart sensor technology deployed in our footprint: air quality, traffic, noise. We are in the process right now to look at bringing that into the system. So again, I view this most recent launch as the initial step. We are looking at a roadmap in terms of like what additional data sets can we bring into it. And certainly we're very interested to learn, from other interested parties, like, hey, if we could have access to, to this data set, or can we bring this data set in, or, it could be public data sets that are out there that, again, when correlated, could further enrich the environment. So, we're very much learning as we go. And so far, there's been a tremendous amount, of interest across the sector, let's say.
You answered a little bit of my question around who has access. So if you need to expand that, feel welcome. But past who's getting in there to use the platform, what are they achieving with it? Are they bringing you all new ideas, or are they highlighting areas of the system that may have an opportunity or a vulnerability? I know it's somewhat early on the rollout, but both who's in there and then what are they finding? What are they doing? How is it helping?
So the first like real, let's say, proof test for this was as part of the 030 initiative. As we were establishing the digital twin, leveraging AusSense, we were working with Deloitte, related to running various scenarios as it relates to electrification. Like, what if we saw, EVs increase from X percent to Y percent? What if we saw rooftop solar DERs again increase from X percent to Y percent, and so on? And so Deloitte built a product called Electrify Grid that would look at all of the electrical elements in our system and would identify where congestion would appear and when and what would cause it and what would be the upgrade that would be required. So that's kind of one, real scenario. And this was prior to the launch of Plug-in Labs. I think it proved to us that software and technology and benefit would result from making this data more accessible. So certainly Deloitte was one. And then we've been working with Concordia University, which is a university in Montreal, who are looking at energy efficiency retrofits, leveraging some software that they have been developing primarily in and around Montreal, but now they're trying to, look at how that could lend itself to our region and with the data that we have. We are also working with a local community college who is building a microgrid on their campus, and they would like to understand, how their microgrid would interact and potentially benefit the utility. And so they're getting underway. But there's been quite a number of others that have reached out. And we're currently, working through, let's say, the process of onboarding, those other entities.
So I think it's fantastically exciting as far as how it could be interfaced with, vendor ecosystem partners, aggregators. You mentioned academia and others. Where does it scale from here? How do you guys use this tool in the future? How does it pay for itself? How do you guys keep rates down, as you start leveraging really interesting new functions like this platform?
Yeah, a great question. So I'll say like one thing that I'm really excited about, Bryce, is so if you think about what we've done at St. John Energy in terms of, putting our most valuable data sets in this digital twin, and then some of the partners that we're working with. And I mentioned, just a couple of them, but, so this data sits in an AusSense environment. We have Landis and Gear, AMI meters at the edge, and then we have, Kraken, MDM, and CIS system. And Landis&Gear and Kraken are implementing like App Store-like capability, so open API access. And I think that is tremendously exciting because now if you're an entrepreneur, an innovator, academia, you really have the ability to look at, again, almost like the flight simulator in terms of like what's going on in the grid, and then look to develop products that could potentially like plug directly into the utility system, to provide benefit. But, from my perspective, the measure of success for this over time will be, can it appear on customers' bills? Like, how do we take this back to affordability? How can we ensure that this is benefiting our customers, at the end of the day?
So shout out to our ecosystem. If they want to check out your platform and see about some new innovations that could come onto the grid, they should check it out. So I think that's fantastic. So as far as, opening data up to wide portions of potential third parties, one of the key questions that comes up is security, cybersecurity, and data ownership. How are you all navigating that side of the equation to make sure that you're not opening up any additional vulnerabilities while you open up all these exciting new potential areas?
Yeah, it's been a significant focus for us. I mean, for many, many years, but I would say certainly a heightened focus over the last 4 years. We've really shifted from foundational controls to more of an enterprise cybersecurity program. Certainly have aligned ourselves with, the NIST framework and ISO 27001. We do annual independent penetration testing, continuous monitoring and vulnerability management, leveraging internal and external parties. We certainly don't, disclose specifics, Bryce, but I would say it's definitely critically important, for us as an electric utility and managing critical infrastructure to ensure that we have the right posture as it relates to cybersecurity. And certainly my team constantly remind me that we will never arrive. This is going to require continuous investment, continuous attention, continuous improvement, into the future. So I would say that is the posture that we have adopted.
So you guys are certainly looking out for your community, but do you think that there's something in particular around this platform for creating a virtual digital world of your system that you can look for opportunities? You think that's something that can be replicated or that other operators can kind of take away? What would your kind of thought be around that?
Well, I definitely think that it can be, replicated. And I do think I would encourage the smaller utilities to kind of lean in. I feel like perhaps we have a bit of an advantage based on our size to be able to move perhaps a bit more quickly. And I do also think it's important because I know AI, like there's lots of conversations about AI and the efficiencies associated with AI, but I would also really encourage, a focus on getting the fundamentals of like data hygiene, right? Like before AI is sort of parachuted in on top of it. And what we have learned is that has taken time, to be able to get the data so we feel good about it, we have confidence in it, and to be able to take the disparate data sets and get them into one environment that it's more manageable, let's say, and easier to glean the insights, across. But I do believe it can be replicated, but everyone's going to have their own unique data set or their own unique, value add, let's say, that they can bring. And I do also think it's critically important to find the right partners. I think that's been a huge part of our success, is to build the coalition of the willing. And, our posture toward affordability, toward innovation and climate change action, I believe has attracted some really interesting folks, to the table that, definitely has helped us do what we've been doing.
We were thinking about doing a rapid fire set of questions, but I wanted to dive deep on the platform. So I'm just going to compress that to a two-parter. What would you say you're most proud of in the work in your time there? And on the flip side of that, how do you guys calculate or how do you measure success?
Well, I would say what I'm most proud of is that I believe we have shown that a community-owned utility, a small community-owned utility, can deliver leading reliability, maintain affordable rates, and still be ambitious about climate change action and innovation. In terms of calculating success, well, I believe that success is when innovation becomes visible on the customer's bill and service experience, and not just simply something that shows up in a presentation.
Absolutely. All right. And then we'll wrap up with this question. I think it's very apparent that you all have a trusted role in your community. But how do you maintain that ahead, right? Utilities, are feeling some pressure in some communities where they operate. I'm sure you all are the same. So how does St. John Energy maintain a trusted role in your community there?
Well, trust is so important. And I do believe that the folks who are working at St. John Energy today are so incredibly fortunate to have inherited, the long and rich legacy that our predecessors have left to us. So I believe we perhaps have a bit of an unfair advantage in terms of like the brand and the trust has existed, for many years and was earned over many years. And I do believe that reliability has played a huge part of that. The fact that we have maintained such a reliable service and have been able to provide that at such a fair price. But to your point about the importance of maintaining it, I'd encourage you to even go online and look at some of what we're doing as it relates to communications. I think that has been critically important for us as well. We really spend a lot of time and energy as it relates to engaging our customers. And that's before decisions are made, not simply, this is why we decided to do what we're doing. And I believe that has served us, very well, to get out ahead of things, to make sure that we're investing in that and that customers can see and can share in the value that's created by innovation.
Ryan, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for being on and sharing everything you guys are doing with us.
All right. My pleasure, Bryce. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to our season sponsor, Virtual Peaker. If you enjoy Grid Pulse, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, give us a like or a review, and tell your colleagues. You can listen to all episodes and learn more about our efforts to advance the grid at gridforward.org.